stuff has happened in the past few years, especially with COVID and the aftermath of the pandemic and Trump's presidency and the ongoing conflicts around the world. So a lot of our speakers have been involved in advocating against war with China during a very hectic and rapidly evolving time period. Um, Now everyone here, and I speak for myself, but also our community and really anyone involved in a similar campaign has most likely undergone a real internal evolution. Takes a lot of energy and motivation to educate yourself to a degree in which your opinions, in contrast with the wider media and the political network of information, digresses from the norm, or at the very least, gains a degree of critical and analytical thinking that is not just taking everything you read as fact, but looking at it in the wider framework of history and the US involvement in overseas conflicts and all the deeper interests at play. And there's so many media outlets now. They all have their own agenda and interests and tones. But what we as activists have to do is digest all that information and decide for ourselves what is the truth that we stand for. And that's not always what is spoken by our political leaders and some of the more trusted news sources. And that's why it's so important to have a community like this where we can bounce all the information and ideas off one another and see where it takes us. So it's a difficult challenge, and we've all been through it, but our community at CODEPINK is all about peace. We don't want war anywhere, let alone with China. We want our resources to go towards initiatives that would affect our planet and our people positively. Things like climate justice and nuclear disarmament and poverty alleviation. So yeah, and the truth is that war with China would be catastrophic for millions and millions of people, not just in China, but around the world. And yet our government continues to surround China with military bases, militarizing the region and committing dangerous acts of provocation. They'll risk a globally catastrophic war to protect the hegemonic status of the US, and just that's not possible anymore. And in the bright, lucid light of history, it's really not an easy thing to continue projecting the US as the good guy of the story. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our speakers to today's webinar. And my first question, and we'll go around so everyone has a chance to answer, but we're going to start with CODEPINK's very own Jodie Evans. And I'd like to know, Jodie, just what incentivized you to begin this campaign? What was that nudge that got you to think, like, this is crazy, we need to do something about this? And from there, what have you learned, like, over your experience in working and advocating for not for war against China?
Thank you. Megan, that was a great introduction into where we are. And so I guess it was over 4 years ago that I decided to start China's Not Our Enemy, because I noticed that it felt just like Iraq in the news. I had been to China and I was posting at my Facebook and people were loving what I was posting. And then all of a sudden, everybody went into hate mode. And like, why is that happening? And so just like Iraq, the lies were being spread across mainstream media. There were no facts or photos or anything I could find that spoke to the truth of what they were trying to present. All they were was driving hate against another country. And I was like, oh no, are we going to go to war on China? Is that what's happening? So 4.5 years ago, it didn't look like that seemed the strangest concept, to now when we hear generals saying, we're going to be at war with China in the next year. So when I started, I knew nothing about China. I still probably know almost nothing about China, but I know a little bit. And first of all, what I have learned is China is a 5,000-year-old civilization. It's got a deep and rich history. The religions of China, like Confucianism and Taoism and Buddhism, create a very different culture than what we're used to in the West. A more Christian culture there's not like this good, bad. Instead, there's a commitment to harmony, understanding, a definite value of peace. I learned that China had taken everyone out of poverty. That was one of the first lessons I learned. And so I watched this movie about it that had been censored by PBS. And when I watched the movie, I could kind of get why, because it's like what they said, oh, we can't show that film. It makes Beijing look too good. But it makes the process of something happening in another country look very different than our own. Because in watching the film, which by the way was made by a Wall Street banker, not connected to China in any way, you saw that the government, the first thing they do is send people to listen and understand what the situation is, and then see what the needs are. And that money is the last thing on the list. I think there were 5 things that had to happen to take someone out of poverty. And they were, having medical care, having education, having their needs met. So it wasn't throwing money at a problem. It was understanding the situation, holding each individual through a process. Wow, that is not what happens in the United States. So first of all, that was wow. And then I wanted to go somewhere where that had happened. Like, okay, so I watched a movie about it. So then I went to Dali, which is over by Burma in China, and really got to talk to the women and understand the community. And not only had they taken everyone out of poverty, but the lake had been polluted by the farmers near it with toxic waste, and it had been killing people. The water from the lake, it was now potable. So to watch someone, what I was doing before China's Not Our Enemy was local peace economy at CODEPINK, which is, that war serves the war economy, and we need to create a peace economy culture to get rid of the war economy culture. And here I am in China in a manifestation of a peace economy culture, which I have to say also I've been witnessing in the encampments in universities the last few weeks. So for me, that is the necessity that we all need to come to, which includes that taking ourselves out of individualism and taking ourselves out of into relationship with the earth and into relationship with each other. And I think one of the things I've learned is that's just kind of the culture of China, that that Confucianism, or, that it's a long, old culture that holds this commitment to life inside of it. So that's one of the things, some of the things I've learned. The other thing is I knew nothing as an American about the rape of Nanjing. We know about our World War II history, but to go to the museum and learn about the rape of Nanjing, which I have to say reminds me very much of what's happening right now in Palestine, a level of violence and inhumanity that's incomprehensible. And that, we as the West don't even talk about it, but it happened to a people that, we're also thinking of going to war on, that it made me understand why the Chinese would be so opposed to war. So that they lost 20 million people fighting fascism. 20 million people. When you think of what the United States lost and what China lost, it's a whole different way of looking at something that I, as a educated American, had not a clue. So mostly what I feel is uneducated about China, and I understand that it's going to take me a long time to learn, but I stay committed to what I do know, which is the United States makes enemies and kills people. And that is what China Is Not Our Enemy is meant to address, the government of the United States. In the meantime, I'm learning a lot about another country that I'm finding quite beautiful, which is a weird thing because I'm discovering beauty. Yet, if you talk about it in mixed company, people think you're crazy. And it's a very disturbing situation because I've had the experience. I've been there. I've felt it. I have an understanding of it. I've talked to people. I've talked to women who their standard of living has gone up 6 times in the last 10 years about what that experience is. I've talked to workers that, they're working and they experience that work not only serves them individually, but it serves the whole culture. They watch the whole culture grow. So I, I've been there. I mean, I told a member of Congress that, I was telling them about China. He said, I know better than you. I get briefed by the State Department. So it's like that level of like the State Department's idea about China, opposed to someone who just goes there and has an experience of China. And to have an experience of China is something I want to encourage everyone to have. And we have a travel page on our China's Not Our Enemy at CODEPINK, because peace is about friendship, it's about cooperation, it's about caring for each other. And we've been made to hate China. And to go and to know is to love, as we know. So thank you, Megan, for this conversation. Happy to be here and look forward to hearing the other voices today.
Thank you so much, Jodie. That was wonderful. I think anyone who's traveled to China that I know has expressed a degree of shock over the just unprecedented infrastructure and poverty alleviation that's going on in the country. And it's a shame how very few classes there are in the US about China. So that's something that we need to work on. Thank you so much. Moving on, Aldous, you have quite the history of China experiences. What triggered you to get involved in this campaign, and what have you learned of all the years being involved in it?
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, thank you very much. I loved your introduction. I especially liked the comment about critical thinking and the necessity to kind of pierce through the mainstream narrative and, kind of think through what is exactly being said and particularly what isn't being said. It's the silence of the field and the mainstream media that really is very is deadening and purposeful too, very purposeful. Anyway, thank you so much for inviting me. I just turned 80, and probably a good almost 60 years of my life have been, so I consider myself maybe an old China hand. That was the term for people like myself getting involved in China. But I kind of wrote down a number of bullet points. I mean, how did I become a China friend, a friend of China? So rather than stop the China hate, how did I become a friend of China? And I had to go through a number of phases. So it's a long story, and I'll try to keep it short. It's my own narrative. Part of my story is as a war refugee. I'm originally a Latvian. I was born in Riga, Latvia in 1944. It was a war situation, Germans, Russians. It's terrible killing. Belarus today was really one of the focal points of that whole Holocaust. I was in a displaced persons camp with my family for 5 years and then came to Cleveland in 1950. So part of my real background is I don't really think positively about wars. So there's a predisposition to being pro-peace, whatever the circumstances are. You got to kind of think your way through. Now, the second bullet point that I put down was the 60s. I became really a bystander, but also became very active in the 1960s. And how it happened was really, again, very haphazardly. I grew up in Cleveland, very apolitical, but one of the things that really puzzled me in the 60s, mid 60s, was why the US government was funding so much time and resources to fight all of these people wearing black pajamas in Vietnam. And that was kind of my level of consciousness at the time. And it sort of got me on a reading binge. I was always a nerd. I spent a lot of time reading in the library and things like that. And so I sort of became self-educated about that part of the world. I read Wilfred Burchett, who I thought was kind of unusual, very unusual. Stoughton Lynd, who went to, Stoughton Lynd was a professor at Yale. And so I started reading about that. And in 68, I was a graduate student, and I decided to really do a deep dive. So I wrote my master's thesis on the French Empire in Indochina. Yes, it's true. All of my mentors said, "What?" And it was a very unusual topic for me. So you can see this is a very scholarly environment. I mean, you can see all the books here. This is not for show. This is for go. We're all there. So that's how I really approached China initially, through books, through book learning, and so on. At the time, there weren't really that many books written about China. You could really claim to know a lot because basically on the books that existed at that time, it was very limited. A lot of them had to do with theology, and a lot of them had to do with how arcane the writing system was. And so, yeah, it was traditional sinology, very different than the field is today. But that kind of got me involved with reading Ho Chi Minh, and it introduced me to ideas like colonialism, imperialism, anti-imperialism, national liberation fronts, communist parties, Communist International, and so on. And so that's really what kind of prompted me. The third element, which is really important, other than education, self-education, critical thinking, going beyond what was presented to you, was this was 68. And there was an election going to take place. Lyndon Johnson looked like he was going to continue the war. Eugene McCarthy was the peace candidate. And I thought, wow, maybe I could do something. So there was a campaign to say, well, neat and clean for Gene. And so I tidied up my beard and my long hair and went up to Wisconsin and pushed doorbells for 2 days. And that was an eye-opener for me. First of all, I was able to kind of overcome my shyness and go out and talk to complete strangers about stopping a war, important stuff. And what really surprised me, what really encouraged me, was that so many people were positive about this. This didn't make any sense to them either. And so that really encouraged me a great deal. Now, probably the fourth, and maybe I should wrap it up a little more quickly because other people also need to speak and so on. But as a scholar, I always loved history. And so I made a really big decision in 1968. It was really a leap of faith. And I don't encourage anybody to do that. It was a real leap of faith, a love of history, a love of books, a love of learning, a search for truth, truly a search for truth. And that was, I committed myself to getting a doctorate in Chinese history. So I started learning Chinese, read all the stuff that was available and whatever it was. And so eventually I went to Hong Kong in 1970, 71 to complete my doctoral dissertation on Beijing municipality during the Cultural Revolution. It was at that time, that was my fourth big step, and that was the trip to China. Jodie was talking about how that was an eye-opener, and I would certainly encourage everybody to do that. So I had the great fortune to go with a group, with a Committee of Concerned Asia Scholars. We were a progressive group of scholars formed in the late 60s at various campuses. A very loose organization. We had our own journal and so on, but we didn't have access to wonderful things like this, like the web, the internet, blogs, and Substacks, and all that good stuff. But in 71, I saw China with my own eyes, and I discovered not only China in a holistic way. You know, one of the things about book learning is everything is kind of compartmentalized. There's a little theme of something. But when you see China as a whole, all those books in a way become part of a much larger whole. And then I also discovered things like Marxism, Leninism. And for me, I became active in a bookstore in Berkeley, California, sold books on China, Japan, the world, but also Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, so on and so forth. So I completed my dissertation in 76. I got my job at USF, University of San Francisco, in 77, taught there for 45 years. Chinese history, Japanese history. I had to do all of Asia. It was a big chore. And I always had to preface everything by saying, I'm kind of guessing what is really going on there. It's my own view of what is happening. I didn't try to hide my credentials as an anti-war activist. People didn't, there were some people who were offended by it, but most people they just said, well, you're just a child of the 60s, which I was, very much a child of the 60s, and still am. I don't repudiate that in any way. So lessons that I've learned, it's a long process. You know, I became a friend of China over a long period of time, uh, initially through education, which is what China's Not Our Enemy is really in many ways all about. Get involved in organizations like I did with Concerned Asia Scholars, like-minded people where you find a safe space to talk and discuss and share ideas, very important. Get out there. You don't have to actually press doorbells anymore. In those days, you had to press doorbells. But now you can post something on Facebook or just do a short TikTok as long as it's available. It may not be for very long, but um, you know, do something just a little bit. Even just talking to your friends when they say they raise their eyebrows about China or whatever it is, and think of it really as a longer process. So I have no real epiphany. There's no particular one moment except maybe in '68 where I made that commitment to do something as crazy as study for a doctorate in Chinese history. My parents were not exactly pleased with it. My mom, when I told her about it, you know, she looked at me and she said, "Isn't Cleveland good enough for you?" And I said, "Well, Mom, I want to see the world. You know, I want to see the world. I want to see China with my own eye. I want to hear what the Chinese have to say for themselves." And I think that's the other part where I pursued my studies in Chinese language. I wanted to hear what the Chinese had to say for themselves. So education, getting involved to whatever level you're comfortable with politically, um, getting involved with good organizations where you have like-minded people, so you feel a larger part of something that's bigger than yourself, and listening to the people themselves. Don't even get filtered. Don't do the filters. Listen to the people directly. Primary sources. That's what we do in the Department of History. We immerse our students in primary sources. Let the people speak for themselves, which our mainstream media never does. They only repeat what the State Department wants you to hear, and that's a very, very narrow band of knowledge and really of propaganda and self-serving nonsense. It's amazing that these people create this kind of stuff. So thank you for listening. This is a sort of a capsule summary of my life. And I'm
Yeah,
proud to have been a
thank you.
Chinese scholar, still am.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Aldous. It's wonderful to hear about your journey. You have such a fascinating background, and I find it really impressive and admirable your journey of self-education and your search for truth that took you across the world to China. So it was wonderful hearing about that. Thank you so much. Um, Linda, it's wonderful to see you. I love seeing you at all our China's Not Our Enemy community meetings. So yeah, tell us what got you involved and what are the things that you've learned during your time with us?
Oh, okay. Well, Megan, thank you for hosting this, and thank you for everybody being on this program, and especially to Jodie for starting China's Not Our Enemy. Yeah, let's see. Well, how did I get involved? Well, I am a child of Indonesian Chinese immigrants to Canada and the United States, and I would have to say that most of my life, I was pretty apolitical, very apolitical. My family, we never discussed politics. And actually, we were discouraged from getting involved in it. And then as far as my connection to my Chinese heritage throughout my life, yeah, I basically, well, we were raised in a Midwestern community and basically just assimilated. And at the time when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of interest in China, and I would say there wasn't a lot of pride in being Asian either, you know. Yeah, and so yeah, so into my adulthood, you know, I didn't really see myself, you know, visiting Asia or China or, you know, interacting with that part of the world. I was content, you know, to make my life, you know, here in the States, in the Midwest. Yeah, and But then in 2017, when Trump got elected, and I always had this, being brought up in American society and imbibing American media and schools, I always had the idea that the American system, liberal democracy and capitalism was the ideal system, even if imperfect, it was evolving, and after the fall of the Soviet Union, I just figured, okay, this is it. This is what we're stuck with, and we're going to keep working with it. Yeah, but then when Trump got elected, I just it was a wake up call to me that maybe there's something wrong with the system. And in the beginning, I was a lot like my other liberal Democratic friends. I was outraged that Hillary didn't win, but then, as I started to do more reading and I started interacting with people, introducing me to independent media, really, that's when my eyes started to open, and I just started to realize that, the system is inherently flawed, and we're in a rough patch, actually a decline right now. Sorry, I will get to the China part eventually. At this point, I'm still not interested in foreign policy and still not engaging too much in my Chinese heritage. Yeah. And then, as I started to, watch independent media, thank God for that, and started to, think that, whoa, this system is broken. And, I got involved in the Bernie campaign, and, I was, for the first time in my adult life, told that, we could have good things in this life. We didn't have to struggle so hard, and that, we as a community could take care of each other. And, so I was mostly at that time fired up by his domestic policies, universal health care, Medicare for all, the government support for a transition to a green economy, and just the uplift of all the people in this country, everybody in it together. And then, of course, the Democratic Party. I'm sorry, we're not supposed to be talking too much about politics or party politics on this call. Sorry, I'll try to avoid that. Then, when his campaign was ended by the establishment, that was another rude awakening that something is wrong. And then right about that time, one of the independent journalists who I was listening to had a little piece on Xinjiang, China. And I'd never, I didn't really know anything about Xinjiang. In fact, I wasn't interested in foreign policy yet at that point. And in fact, during the Bernie campaign, his foreign policy was not that great at that time. And I remember one time, one of his boosters was talking about how he decried, what was going on with the Uyghurs in China at that point. And at that point, I didn't even know what a Uyghur was anyway. So I listened to, Lee Camp's program about Xinjiang, China. And I was like, whoa. And he comes at this, he's very progressive, left-leaning, and very critical of U.S. Imperialism and foreign policy. And he kind of, presented this anti-mainstream view of this, and it made total sense to me. And then, as I started following this more, I came into contact with China's Not Our Enemy, and started listening to, some of Jodie's taped programs, and just started reading and thinking more and learning about China. And up until that point, I would say that I was, up until listening to Lee Camp speak about Xinjiang, I was a lot like a lot of Americans, very, critical of, suspicious of China. I'm embarrassed to say right now, just suspicious of that a socialist government could achieve anything, and kind of bought into the idea of the corruption of the people at the highest levels of powers, highest levels of government, and all that jazz anyway. But the more I started to interact with people who were not a part of the establishment, I just realized, wow, there's another way to look at this. And so so about 3 or 4 years ago, that's when I started my education in China, about China. And now, I'm very, very interested in reconnecting with my Asian roots. I'm studying Chinese again. So, and, reading what I can. And, and I think I'm a different person now, having, in the past few years, having, lived through so many crises, like so many other Americans, I think we're really beginning to see this whole system, start to fall apart, through lack of investment, in social infrastructure, and now I definitely have a much more am able to look at a different system as something that could work. And so right now I'm very much a student of China, learning about the history, learning about their system, with a more open mind. And at this stage in my development, yeah, I really feel like I am a friend of China too, and I want our two countries to be friends too. I believe, with all the crises that we as a human family are facing, the only solution is cooperation, not war. And even though I was apolitical most of my life, I always just had like an inherent revulsion towards war, and it always puzzled me, why is it that we're always going to war? Like, throughout my adult years, we went through the first Iraq war, then the second Iraq war, Afghanistan, and now we're engaged in Israel Palestine. And yeah, in the past I just thought that these were like aberrations, or just the policy decisions of a few bad apples. But now I'm thinking that beginning to realize that the war machine in the US is very strong, and I don't want to see them driving us to war with China or anybody. And I'm coming to appreciate and learn about China's peaceful rise, these past 75 years, and the deeper affinity for peace, in its long 5,000-year history. So yeah, I'm learning about China, and I'm hoping, our government leaders, our media will also learn from China, and just reverse course in this present situation. So.
Thank you so much, Linda. I think what you said, we all have our own unique journeys, and we all experience these moments of doubt and fear. And I think that's a lifelong endeavor. And I think it's a good sign, because it means, you're really exploring and analyzing your feelings about these things. And it's a complicated process. It's not easy. So I'm glad you've made this journey and that you're here with us. Okay. And next we have Mike, who has been really wonderful, helpful member of our community. Mike, would you tell us about your involvement in the campaign and the things that you've learned? Mike, are you there?
Mute, sorry. Yeah, okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you. Well, I'm very grateful to the CODEPINK group, and I just want to say one of my co-workers in a Stop AUKUS meeting in a group in New Zealand recently modelled herself on CODEPINK in a demonstration against a speech given by our foreign minister, holding up placards and being carted out of the meeting in the parliamentary buildings, and very much due to CODEPINK inspiration. So thank you for that. I've been a peace activist my whole life. I'm 84, currently in London. And my interest in China, I suppose really my wife took our 15-year-old daughter to China on a school trip when she was learning high school in 1979. And she made friends, I made friends. My nephew was married in Hong Kong in 2000. We met more friends. And then I was the secretary of the Labour Party and went on a delegation to the Communist Party in 2004 and made friends with party members. And so I got very interested in China and its people through those friendships and its history. I agree absolutely with all this. I've read up on the Opium Wars, the Taiping Rebellion, the Boxer Rebellion, the Second World War experiences of China, and what I and so to me, what has happened is happening in the world is America has now turned its attention to China as a threat to it, and the prospect of war is very real. For us in New Zealand, the objective is to stop our government and from being drawn into America's anti-China orbit, which is where they're heading at the moment. We're making a little bit of we're making some ground. A former Prime Minister, Helen Clark, who kept us out of the war in Iraq, has been a very strong supporter. So, yeah, I have many good Chinese friends. I am very interested in China's history and the way it does things, and just look at its fantastic development. Most fundamentally, that what China is offering, and it's offered to New Zealand, let's be friends, and it's offered us a massive free trade agreement, and that's what its offer is onto the whole of the world. And they keep saying it. Aldous talked about primary sources. You read anything Xi Jinping says, and that's what he talks about. And the crazy thing to me is that is what is on offer, and what is being how it's being responded to by the West, which is a minority in the world now, is to see it as a threat and go to war. So yeah, I'm very much for accepting China's friendship and working to bring about what they want is a prosperous and secure and safe, peaceful future for everyone. The end of my little contribution, and thank you for the offer. I'm sorry, I'm on a phone in London. I'm way away from home at the moment, but so I can just see. Is it you, Megan? Who am I seeing on my screen? Not sure.
Yes, I'm Megan. I am the campaign coordinator.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know a lot of the people that are living in the Asia Pacific, these countries where the US is building military bases and militarizing, they will in fact bear the brunt of a conflict if one was to break out. So, it's in our interest to protect these people and do what we can.
Well, the good news is the Solomons have just re-elected a government that is going to maintain its friendship with China. It's caused enormous consternation with our government in Australia and the US, but the Pacific people are sort of in their own way standing firm for peace.
Yeah. And what you say too about, reading primary sources, I find it really fascinating to, look at the reports from the Chinese Communist Party and just to, read about how they are seeking a stable and mutually beneficial relationship, and especially comparative to what you see being written by US policy experts. It's really an interesting comparison. I recommend everyone to look into those.
They have 5-year plans and they intend to implement them, and they do.
Yeah. All right. So I think is Richard here? I'm not sure if Richard's here or Jeff. Richard or Jeff? Well, that's okay if they're not here.
Yeah, this is Richard Rothschiller. Sorry, I don't have anything to add today. I'm just kind of learning. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. I mean, if you'd like to share your experience of you've traveled to China, correct?
Yeah, I worked there in 1983 and 1984 at a couple of public universities and traveled around for about 4 months. That's my limited time in China.
Oh yeah. Do you have any, experiences that stood out to you while you were there that was really unexpected?
Um, yeah, I was pretty young. I was in my 20s. I didn't know a lot what to expect except from books I'd read and the propaganda indoctrination growing up as an American. And I think, well, I mean, everyone was wearing mouse suits at that time, riding bicycles, etc. I think the dignity of the Chinese people uh, stood out for me. Their uh, their identity and their understanding of history and time relative to American you know consciousness. Um, their attempt to create a better world, uh, especially for the people who are not the beneficiaries of capitalism and imperialism. And I think I saw 3 homeless people maybe in all that in over a year. And and I came out and worked in Hong Kong for a little bit, and I was the main street in Kowloon was just lined with homeless people. And I went back to LA and were homeless people living in the Safeway parking lot, that kind of thing. Yeah, so those kind of things. And working alongside, I was working in the English departments and working alongside my colleagues and, you know, experiencing how decisions were made differently from like, more horizontal kind of decision making. And I don't know, there was a lot. At the time, the Chinese said yes. People who come here for a week write a book. People who come for a month write a journal article. People who come for a year don't write anything. And that's kind of how it felt. It was just so vast. And yeah, and I've just admired, China and what it's done since then. And, it's quite, it's complicated more than even I can comprehend. But yeah, just what they're trying to do in the world today, create a less unipolar world and a more cooperative one. Okay, I've been rambling. I wasn't prepared, but thanks for asking.
No worries, thank you. We appreciate your contributions. I think, that really aligns with what Jodie was talking about with the PBS documentary on poverty alleviation. And I definitely recommend anyone interested should go watch that. It's a really fascinating documentary. And, they took it off PBS for whatever reason, but you can find it on YouTube. Yeah, and so I guess, we have some more time. If anybody has any questions they want to ask, or I'd love to hear from Aldous or Linda, Mike, if you have any advice for people that are interested in getting involved in the campaign or something similar, like how do we get ahead of this onslaught of information and programming that is meant to convince us that war with China could be necessary or that it's for the greater good? Do you have any advice for, people that are interested?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm the guru here, but I think for the people who are here, you're already participating in a group that is, on the face of it, not against China, which is kind of an anomaly right off the bat. So I think that's number one. And then number two, read up on it. I mean, I tend to be more of a scholar about this, but there's so much information out there in YouTube, and there's a huge number of materials, speeches, as well as written documents there that you can really explore. So it's a new world out there. It's not just about China, but also about information acquisition and, again, critical thinking. Does this make sense? So always have an open mind, be courageous, be disciplined, and take it one bite at a time. One bite at a time. It's a long process, and Um, my great reassurance is that, we kind of are wringing our hands over our government creating China as our enemy. But China's been around for an awfully long time as a civilization, 5,000 plus years, and as a people, probably 1 million years, and so on. And so China's going to get through this. I'm not sure about us. It's like, whoa, we're the problem, and not us, but really our government that is kind of leading us into these cul-de-sacs and these dead ends, misusing our resources and misusing the goodwill of the American people to do terrible things in our name. And so, we have to kind of stand up for honesty and for, just trying to reclaim our good reputation. Um, we're Americans, and we're better than the State Department. We really are. So a little bit of courage and just doing some reading, just exploring. So I think one of the best places to start is the China's Not Our Enemy website. There's so much good stuff to read, and you can sort of network from that. There are all sorts of hot links where you go, and that'll encourage you. And yes, so arm yourself with facts. That'll give you courage, and look at this as a long-term struggle in some ways, because not only are we fighting this misinformation, but we're also fighting, as Linda said, this very powerful war machine. Today, it happens to be the enemy du jour happens to be China and Russia or whoever, Hamas. Who knows? 5 years from now, could be Peru, it could be Chile, it could be South Africa. I mean, they're looking for patsies or convenient targets that people don't really know much about to fool people into believing that you've got to give up all your money and your life to support these quixotic efforts on the part of the U.S. State Department. So a pep talk. I'm a cheerleader, so I should have my pom-poms and stay with it. Stay with it. Be courageous. Use critical thinking. Get to those primary sources. This is what I always tell my history students. So go, go, go.
Great. Yeah, it's a lifelong journey, and there's always going to be an enemy. There's always been an enemy, and there'll always be an enemy. That's what they'll tell us. So we're going to stay ahead of the game, decide they're not our enemy before they accuse them of being one. Mike?
Mike,
are you
if you're
there? Your
speaking,
hand's up.
you're muted.
Sorry, yeah, okay. A massive opportunity, I think, is what China's doing for the environment. I'm reading, for example, that it's well, I don't know, more trees than anybody, more solar panels than anybody, more. I mean, they're doing things the Chinese way, which is huge. Not by small steps. And I haven't read up on it. I haven't researched it. I don't know about it in detail. But I think one of the ways to combat the demonizing of China is to switch the target and look at what they are doing that everybody pretty well feels positive about. And my understanding is they are leading the world in terms of the response to climate change, and certainly in where I live in the Pacific, that is the number one priority for peoples all around the Pacific, because they're watching sea level rise swamp their islands fundamentally. And it's happening to anybody who's living near the shore is feeling the same problem. But China is doing, I think, from my understanding, amazingly well in that area, and that's a line of opening up of argument that switches the target and puts up something that everybody can basically pretty much agree on. So just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Michelle? Oh, I think you're on mute. I still can't hear you, sorry. Yeah, Linda?
While we're waiting for Michelle to find her way back to us, I had a question. I would love to, start conversations in our community about China. Boy, but it seems like there's just been, as long as I've been involved with China is not our enemy, there's just been so many like more primary crises. Like in the beginning, it was the Ukraine war, and now it's like everybody's totally focused on Gaza. How do we begin a conversation about China without pulling attention away from, the current like most urgent crises and not to take away human energy and resources from that focus? What would you suggest?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's definitely a process of trying to, hold these priorities in our heads while we, continue to learn and explore, the different narratives. Michelle, do you have your audio back on? Okay. She asked for a recommendation on a history book on China, particularly in the early 20th century. Did you have a history book that you recommend, Aldous?
Oh, history books. Gosh, there really isn't anything that's, something that I would recommend without any kind of qualms. Um, let's see, the ones that I used are, I would probably go for Jonathan Spence. It's a little bit old, but it's probably the most detailed. And, you know, I would start there. Jonathan Spence was a professor at Yale for many years, and I think is In Search of Modern China. So it's again, it's very mainstream. Do we have a progressive textbook on China? I don't think so. Maurice Meisner is a good source where he gets close to. Meisner taught at the University of Wisconsin for many years, and he's written quite a bit. But I would suggest him. Maybe not. It won't focus entirely on the early 20th century, but there's enough early 20th century to kind of give you a sense of imperialism and the whole context of the rise of the communist movement. So I would say Maurice Meisner, any of the works by Maurice Meisner, he's probably one of the very best writers on early 20th century and 20th century China. I don't agree with everything, but he's very knowledgeable, and I think he won't lead you too far astray.
Did you have a recommendation too, Linda?
Yes, I did. I'm just starting my reading too, Michelle, and I wanted to recommend two very easy reads, very thin books. One is a graphic novel. It was actually written in the 1970s by a very famous Mexican cartoonist who goes by the pen name Rius, R-I-U-S. And he wrote a book that I just recently picked up called Mao for Beginners. And he totally upended everything that I had learned about the Cultural Revolution, Mao, from, mainstream, sources and stuff like that. Very sympathetic view. And so it was eye-opening. Yeah. Aldous, have you heard of the cartoonist Rius and this book?
I have, yes.
Oh my God, it's so good. My husband just bought it for me for my birthday. I'm so thrilled. But yeah, basically talks about Chinese history through the lens of Mao's life, and it was refreshing, really, really interesting. Thin book. And then there's another book that I just finished and read, just published about a year ago, written also a very sympathetic view of China, and I'm not trying to push, my politics, my left-leaning politics, but it's just such a contrast, to what we hear in mainstream media. So it's nice to get these very, very alternate viewpoints. And anyways, this is written by Carlos Martinez. He's also part of a peace group from Great Britain. Megan, you might know about them. Anyway, he wrote a book called The East is Still Red, and basically he talks about Chinese history since the revolution, from the standpoint of a socialist, from a Western socialist, and kind of talked about their poverty alleviation program, and also talked about, just a socialist perspective on the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, those moments in their history that, Western media likes to, critique and dog. I mean, just a little bit more sympathetic. Yeah. And it also talks about and zooming forward to the present, talks about their successes and their great strides in combating climate change. Yeah, and also it talks about, just kind of puts it all in the context of the current situation where, Western imperialist powers feel very threatened, that, China is, going its own way economically, politically, and what it all means. And so, yeah, so that's a good one too. Very well written.
Yeah.
It's written for a general audience. So yeah, so
And I
easy.
definitely recommend checking out the China's Not Our Enemy page too. We're going to be putting up a book list soon of recommended books from our community. So you'll have that. And yeah, so it's about to be 5. I think just to wrap it up, our next China is Not Our Enemy community meeting is next Monday on May 13th at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So we'd love to have any new participants join us. You can send me an email at megan@codepink.org for more information. And thank you everyone for coming today. It was wonderful to hear from all of you. And I hope to see you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.